the headlines. South Korean President Park Geun-hye calls for inter-Korean dialogue once again, but could North Korea's angry reactions to anti-Pyongyang leaflets from the South put the talks in jeopardy? Beijing calls on Seoul to release Chinese fishermen arrested for illegally fishing in South Korean waters and resisting law enforcement. And we now have the first Ebola patient who has contracted the virus inside the United States, a nurse who wore protective gear while treating an Ebola victim. Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us tonight. Kicking it off tonight at the top office of South Korea. President Park Geun-hye has once again emphasized that Seoul is open for talks with Pyongyang despite recent contradictory signals coming from North Korea. This in a meeting with a committee solely dedicated to making preparations for potential unification of the two Koreas. Choi You-sun starts us off.
3 days after North Korea fired machine gun rounds in retaliation of South Korean propaganda leaflets, President Park Geun-hye stressed that the two Koreas need to engage in talks.
전쟁 중에도 대화는 필요하다는 말이 있듯이 한반도 긴장 완화와 평화 정착을 위해서는 대화가 지속되어야 합니다. 고위급 접촉을 남북 관계 개선의 기회로 삼아야 합니다.
Pyongyang's latest hostile act came just days after it took Seoul up on an offer for talks. At our Unification Preparatory Committee's second meeting Monday, the South Korean president said when the two sides meet, they should talk over the possibility of the South lifting sanctions that were imposed after the North torpedoed a South Korean warship in 2010. By referring to the sanctions, a major bone of contention between the two Koreas for the first time since taking office last year, President Park is thought to have placed more weight on settling issues through dialogue. The president, however, took a cautious tone about mending ties with North Korea, saying inter-Korean relations have always been double-sided.
섣부른 판단으로 남북 관계의 환경을 바꾸는 것은 매우 위험한 일입니다. 그렇기 때문에 정부는 앞으로도 도발에는 단호히 대처해 나가되 대화의 문은 항상 열어놓고 평화 정착을 위해 노력해 나갈 것입니다.
As for a campaign to have both Koreas prepare for unification, the president called for a detailed plan to break ground on her envisioned DMZ Peace Park, a charter to instill public will for unification and increase support for the North's humanitarian needs. Choi You-sun, ARIRANG News.
Meanwhile, North Korea continues to send strong warnings against South Korean activists flying anti-Pyongyang leaflets across the border. The regime has not backed out of scheduled inter-Korean talks yet, but did urge Seoul to make what it calls the right decision. Our Unification Ministry correspondent Hwang Sung-hee reports.
North Korea has warned it will step up its physical strikes if South Korean activists continue to fly anti-Pyongyang leaflets across the border. In a statement released Sunday, the North said its military attack designed to destroy balloons carrying anti-North leaflets on Friday shows its warnings are not empty words. But Pyongyang did not back out of an agreement to hold a second round of high-level talks.
There is still chance for making a decision. South Korea should acknowledge our sincere efforts to write a new history for improving North-South relations and not pour cold water on the opportunity.
In response, South Korea said Monday that the high-level talks, slated for late this month or early November, should take place as planned, but reiterated it will not interfere with civilian activities.
I believe it is the government's duty to guarantee the freedom of expression unless the law specifies otherwise. At the same time, we must continue efforts to protect our people and property from North Korean threats.
Seoul's defense ministry said Monday that Pyongyang, through their military hotline on Saturday, declared the start of a battle to destroy South Korean balloons carrying the controversial leaflets. Considering that South Korea had warned earlier of strong countermeasures against further provocations, experts say the latest military tensions could put inter-Korean relations back at square one. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
Beijing is demanding answers in the shooting death of a Chinese fisherman at the hands of the Korea Coast Guard. Officials here say the use of force was necessary in the face of a threat posed by the captain and his crew. They plan to pursue charges against others on board for illegal fishing and acts of violence. Choi You-sun has more.
Illegal fishing by Chinese vessels is common in waters off Korea's west coast, and so are clashes between their fishermen and Korea Coast Guard officials. The latest came Friday when a Chinese fishing boat captain was shot dead during such a clash. 3 others who were on board had been arrested for acts of violence against the Coast Guard, while 16 other crewmen are being investigated. On Monday, the Korea Coast Guard requested an arrest warrant for the chief engineer of the fishing boat due to the absence of the deceased captain. The arrest is sought because the 45-year-old chief engineer has failed to pay a $112,000 deposit for fishing out of season and not properly equipping the fishing boat with the proper documentation and gear. The death of the Chinese fisherman also caused diplomatic friction between the two countries. Chinese Assistant Foreign Minister Liu Jianqiao lodged a protest to Korean ambassador to China, Park Geun-hye, and asked that Korea conduct a thorough investigation into the case, punish those responsible, and take measures to prevent similar incidents from happening again. The Korea Coast Guard maintains that the Chinese fishermen resisted arrest using knives and even tried to strangle the Korean officers who had boarded the vessel. Kwon delivered his condolences to the family of the Chinese skipper and promised to provide regular reports on the progress of the probe. He also defended the police action, calling it a legitimate means of cracking down on illegal fishing. It is the first time that the Chinese government has lodged a protest to Ambassador Kwon since he took his post in June last year. Choi You-sun, ARIRANG News.
It's almost impossible to walk around a neighborhood without running into a franchised coffee shop these days in Korea. And this industry, as it's hitting its saturation point, naturally, customers have started to look for something different, something more personal. And that's what our Kwon So-hwa is taking a look into on this week's Industry Insight.
In the 5 minutes I've been walking along this street in Seoul's Gangnam district, I've passed by 20 coffee shops.
A recent survey revealed that Koreans drink coffee more often than they eat rice, in one of the clearest examples yet of Koreans' love for coffee.
Breaking it down, the average Korean adult drinks more than 12 cups of coffee a week. That's almost 2 a day. And coffee imports are on the rise as well. Last year's amount would be the equivalent of nearly 300 cups per person. Korea's coffee market is estimated to be worth more than 6.1 trillion won or $5.7 billion. The industry got a big boost when Starbucks arrived in Korea back in 1999. Soon after, domestic brands jumped on the bandwagon to compete against foreign franchises, and they rapidly expanded their business too.
Korea's coffee industry is one of the fastest growing in the world. One of the reasons is because Koreans are quick to adapt to new cultures. Also, trying different foods and drinks is a very important cultural activity in our daily lives.
However, with some brands like Cafe Bene edging close to 1,000 stores nationwide, industry observers say the market for branded coffee shops is saturated. Now, an increasing number of consumers are opting for something special that's not on every corner, like at this independent coffee shop.
The coffee tastes more unique than at franchises, and I feel much cozier here. That's why I come here a lot.
In the past, people put more importance on the spatial side of coffee shops, as they looked for a good place to chat, read, or surf the internet. However, these days they are more interested in the actual taste of the coffee they buy. That's why I think more and more coffee shops will adopt specialty coffees, like we do.
Marang Coco's CEO focuses on satisfying the individual needs of his customers. He says that while big franchises have the upper hand when it comes to marketing, it takes them time to develop a new menu, whereas small stores can communicate with customers and get feedback right away. And that's how menu items like Dutch cream beer, popovers, candy pop latte, to name just a few, have been such a hit with their customers. It remains to be seen, though, whether Korean consumers' desire for something unique and more delicious is enough to break the steady dominance of the big-name players. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chae-ri for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to The National Pension Service in Korea is planning to increase its exposure to the stock market next year while reducing its investment in bonds and property. According to a report submitted to the National Assembly today, the fund is looking to surpass the 100 trillion won mark in terms of its stock investment next year. That's up 30% from this year and nearly double from 5 years ago. The National Pension Fund's holdings in the country's stock market represented 6.6% of the total market cap as of the end of July. The KakaoTalk operator has apologized for a state surveillance controversy and promised more privacy protection measures. This comes after recent controversy over possible monitoring of KakaoTalk messages by the government. Daum Kakao says it plans on boosting security for users by cutting the storage period for chats from 5 to 7 days to 2 to 3 days, and adding new privacy protection functions as well. It's that time of the year when job seekers in Korea get busy trying to find and land their dream jobs. Arguably, the most sought-after position is a seat at Korea's largest conglomerate, Samsung. Some 100,000 applicants tried to pass through the first gate yesterday. Son Jung-in has more.
It's early on a Sunday morning and hundreds of job seekers look nervous as they get ready to take the Samsung aptitude test, the company's current employment system. The test is the first gateway they need to pass through in order to land a job at the company.
I prepared for the test by reading SSAT-related books that give you examples of all the questions that are likely to come up.
Some 100,000 hopefuls apply for jobs at Samsung Group and its subsidiaries in the second half of this year for around 4,000 vacancies. The test was held in 82 regions, including 3 test venues abroad.
I majored in liberal arts and I'm poor at science, so I focused more on the subject, but surprisingly, there were more questions on world history and literature, so I was a little overwhelmed.
Korean conglomerates have started to put more emphasis on understanding Korean history and liberal arts when recruiting applicants. They realized that English test scores and school grades were not enough to find applicants with creative minds. LG Group included questions on Chinese characters in their employment test, while SK, GS, and POSCO added more history-related questions. However, critics say it's just an additional source of stress for job seekers already faced with the daunting challenge of finding a good job in the country. Son Jung-in, ARIRANG News.
An overwhelming majority of Korean university students are very much underwhelmed by the politicians that represent them. In a survey conducted by a local newspaper on nearly 2,000 college students this August and September, 85% of respondents said politicians were the most unreliable group in Korean society. Journalists were next on the list at around 7%, followed by soldiers and businessmen at about 2% each. As for the most reliable segment of the population, more than 15% of respondents pointed to themselves, university students, and then nonprofits and farmers. Regarding the most pressing issue in Korea, more than a quarter of those surveys said it was corruption, followed by the disparity between the rich and the poor. On a much lighter note, autumn is when people easily become sentimental and nostalgic. And a few musical acts have decided to tap into that sentiment this year with comeback albums and performances. Our Imuni introduces us to some of these artists.
The Classic, a hit duo from the 90s, released a teaser last month hinting at a new album. And after much anticipation, it's finally here. It's been a decade since the beloved pair has released anything new, and their reappearance is bringing back nostalgic memories.
It's about that reminiscent feeling of being an adult and going back to find that childhood neighborhood you grew up in.
They first debuted in 1994, and although they had many hits themselves, some of their songs were kept alive on the charts after being remade by younger artists.
Many of my younger peers kept singing my songs, which encouraged me while I was creating music. So now I feel like I have this new energy.
Another romantic voice back in the game is singer-songwriter Kim Dong-yul, who has returned to woo his audiences once again with a new album.
I'm a huge fan of Kim Dong-yul. It's been a while since I've heard new music from him, so this is a real treat.
And other stars from the 90s making comebacks are Yoo Hee-yeol, who became an iconic one-man band with Toy, and singer-songwriter Yoon Sang, who recently released a new single with plans for an album in the near future.
The stars from the 90s had a strong fan base, and now popular shows these days often audition with hit songs from the 90s, so the younger generation is staying in contact.
These 90s heartthrobs know that their era may have passed, but they've still got it in them, and their loyal fans eagerly awaiting a return to the stage. Im Yoon-hee, ARIRANG News.
A nurse in the United States has been confirmed as the first person to contract the Ebola virus on American soil. And for more, Paul E. is joining us from the News Center. Paul, this healthcare worker had direct contact with a Thomas Duncan, an Ebola patient who died last week. What kind of response have we been seeing to this latest infection?
Well, health authorities from the state to federal level are scrambling to contain the deadly disease, but the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is warning that there could be even more cases in the coming days. The incident is also highlighting the risks that healthcare professionals are facing on the front lines, regardless of where they are in the world. Our Kim In-ji has this report.
U.S. health officials have confirmed that a healthcare worker in Texas has contracted Ebola, marking the first known transmission of the virus in the U.S. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control announced Sunday local time that preliminary blood tests were positive. The nurse, who was reported to have had a low-grade fever on Friday, had tended to a Liberian man who died of the virus at a Dallas hospital last week. The CDC director warned that more workers could have been exposed to the virus, attributing the nurse's infection to a breach of safety protocol. He said a full investigation would be launched into the matter.
We are evaluating other potential healthcare worker exposures, because if this individual was exposed, which they were, it is possible that other individuals were exposed. We know that this individual did provide care to the index patient on multiple occasions, and that care included extensive contact.
Hospital officials say the worker had been wearing protective gear during treatment, which includes gowns, gloves, masks, and shields. The nurse is said to be in a stable condition. In a statement later in the day, U.S. President Barack Obama urged federal authorities to take immediate additional steps to ensure hospitals and healthcare workers nationwide are prepared to follow protocols should they tend to an Ebola patient. The current Ebola outbreak, the worst of its kind, has killed more than 4,000 people, mostly in West Africa, with over 8,000 infected. But with thousands of Liberian healthcare workers set to go on an indefinite strike late Monday night over a pay dispute, efforts to contain the spread could be put at risk. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
And now on to developments in the Middle East. The Pentagon says Turkey has agreed to let U.S. warplanes use its military bases as the fight continues against Islamic State militants. Paul, officials in Washington have welcomed this move by Ankara, but some are saying it's come far too late.
Well, the Turkish government has been under pressure from its own people and even the UN to launch some sort of military action to push back the advance of Islamic State. Though that day has not come yet, White House officials say this latest deal is the next best thing. Speaking on NBC News on Monday, U.S. National Security Advisor Susan Rice said American coalition forces were granted access to facilities in Turkey to engage IS targets within Syria and Iraq. Rice added that U.S. commanders would also be able to train Syrian opposition forces there, but stressed that neither the U.S. nor Turkey would commit any ground troops to the growing conflict.
Our interest is in the following. First of all, the Turks have, just in the last several days, made a commitment that they will, in the first instance, allow the United States and our partners to use Turkish bases and territory.
Meanwhile, the flashpoint Syrian border town of Kobani continues to be under siege by IS fighters for the fourth straight week. Kurdish forces have reportedly launched a counteroffensive to retake parts of the town with the help of U.S.-led airstrikes. The fear is that if the town falls, thousands of civilians would be massacred and insurgents would gain a path to Baghdad.
And checking in on what's going on in Hong Kong, Paul, rival protest groups in the city's financial district have clashed in one of the biggest scenes of violence since this pro-democracy movement began there. What triggered this incident?
Well, tensions have been brewing for over 3 weeks since the protest campaign began, and it's been boiling over with anti-Occupy groups saying enough is enough, demanding demonstrators clear the streets. Chaos erupted on Monday afternoon as hundreds of men wearing surgical masks reportedly stormed the main pro-democracy site. Police then moved in to break up the civil unrest and disperse the angry crowds. This as pro-Beijing supporters, business owners, and taxi drivers staged a rally chanting "Occupy is illegal."
There was a group of people who gathered over here, and then they look like gangsters, I'm not sure, but then there's another group, the other group of people trying to take picture of them because they suspect that they are going to have some kind of action, so they take photo, and then the group of people who look like gangsters, they start running towards them.
Hours earlier, police and heavy machinery began forcibly removing some protest barricades in central Hong Kong, home to global financial institutions and government buildings. Activists are calling on Beijing to grant fully democratic elections for the territory, a demand that Chief Executive C.Y. Leung says will fall on deaf ears.
And finally, Paula, the South African track star Oscar Pistorius has returned to court after being convicted of killing his girlfriend at his home last year. And this high-profile murder trial has been in the international spotlight for months now. So how is it going to end?
Well, Pistorius is facing a 15-year prison sentence, which can be suspended to community service. The 27-year-old double amputee was found guilty last month of culpable homicide for shooting dead Riva Steenkamp on Valentine's Day. Pistorius' therapist was called as the first witness on Monday, saying that the Paralympian was suffering genuine remorse over the death. His defense lawyer says one of the biggest factors in this ruling will be that the fact that Pistorius is a first-time offender. Ahead of the hearing, the prosecution said the case should be wrapped up by Friday.
The minimum sentence X does not apply to couple homicide, so there's no maximum or minimum. It's just it can vary from a suspended sentence to a fine to imprisonment. It will be only the judge that will decide which one is the appropriate sentence.
Judge Thokozila Masipa cleared Pistorius of murder charges, saying prosecutors had failed to prove his intent to kill when he fired 4 gunshots through a door of a bathroom. Pistorius claims he mistook Steenkamp for an intruder and acted out of fear for his life. Charity?
All right, Paul, thank you so much for those stories, and we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours. Hope your week is off to a great start. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with the weather updates. So it was a beautiful autumn day for the inland regions. However, due to Typhoon Pongpong currently over Japan, showers are falling along the eastern coast. Also, at the moment, a strong wind watch has been issued for those areas, including Busan, and winds are blowing at a rate of about 6.2 meters per second, which is approximately 2 to 3 times stronger than the average. As for tomorrow, bright and clear autumn conditions are forecast, but keep in mind that we will wake up to a chilly and a brisk morning. Otherwise, typical autumn weather continues before nationwide showers falls once again this Thursday. Taking a closer look at Tuesday's readings, Seoul, Daegu, and Busan hit 20, Gwangju 21. On to other regions. Daejeon and Jeju reach the high teens, Dokdo 15. That'll do it for now. I'll be back with more updates after 10. See you soon. Yes, see you then. Bo-kyung, thank you so much. And that will do it for this edition of ARIRANG News. Thanks for watching.